Hi there, my name is Matt Furness, and this is The Culture Hack, a video and podcast series that captures experiences and life lessons from those who know culture best. The goal? To help you to understand, design, and change your company culture. Thanks for tuning in. Hi everyone, and welcome to The Culture Hack. It's Matt Furness here from Click Culture Consulting, and I'm joined today by Paul Teasdale. Paul is now an independent performance consultant. Before that, he worked in F1 for McLaren, amongst other positions. I'm really looking forward to talking to Paul today about what organizations can learn from F1 about high performance culture. So welcome, Paul. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Absolute pleasure.
So we'll be talking today about your views on company culture, including the challenges that you faced at F1, what you did about it, and the lessons that you've learned and the lessons that we can take from F1 and share them with other types of organizations. But just to start, it would be good to know a little bit more about your story and your background.
Yeah, well, thanks. And yeah, it's an interesting one. And I haven't always worked in F1. I've done about 7 years working with McLaren. But before that, I've done everything from sausage making through to banking. I've worked in food manufacturing for a lot of that time, both as a production manager and as a consultant as well. I just spent a bit of time in shipping, international shipping, moving containers around the world. So I've had a very varied career, but the connecting thread has always been about helping people perform. So I've taken that mindset of manufacturing, which is my sort of my trade, should we say, my degree back in the day in manufacturing engineering, and the improvement approach that manufacturing take. And traditionally started off moving in a traditional manner in the manufacturing space. But as my career's progressed, I moved that into more of the corporate environment, brought that into banking in a different service industry before moving back to the UK. So in the banking, and another role that I did for 5 years was in New Zealand. So I spent some time living and working out there, and then moved back to the UK to work for McLaren, which was an opportunity that came about serendipitously, as these things often do, and had some amazing experiences working McLaren. And then more recently, I've gone independent. So yeah, that's been my journey.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. And I'm curious how you got from sausage making to F1. I don't think I've ever heard anyone in the I don't think I've ever met anyone in the sausage making business before. So congratulations on being the first.
There's not many of us that have taken that route, I'm sure. But no, as I say, my training was in manufacturing.
Mm,
The first job that I took out of university was actually with a place that repaired and overhauled aeroplane engine parts.
right.
And it was a graduate role and a performance improvement role within that organization.
Mm,
Um, and it turned out that there wasn't really a graduate scheme there. They hadn't
mm,
really
mm, mm,
brought it all together. They just brought some graduates in, and then
mm,
once every few months they'd get them together and have a jolly. And so I was interested in a more developmental graduate scheme, and went and it looked externally and said, right, how do we build one? If
mm,
we haven't got
mm,
one already, I'm going to help you build one. So work with the HR team there to actually look external to say who's doing this stuff really well,
mm,
what can we learn, and what would a graduate scheme look like in this organization. By the time we'd actually got that together, I realized that my time as a graduate was pretty much over. And so therefore I wasn't going to be getting the benefit out of that scheme. And one of
mm,
the organizations that I saw that was doing this stuff really well was a company called Kerry Foods,
mhm,
and
mhm.
they, amongst other things, make sausages. And I ended up in
Right.
their factory in Manchester on their graduate scheme, doing production management. I had some amazing experiences with some wonderful people in that space. And then as my career progressed, the sort of I've always been one for what's the opportunity in front of me.
Mm,
I
mm,
moved from the sausage making to a shipping role, that was in Liverpool, with a company that was organising the transport of containers to and from shipping ports, who were looking for somebody to help them improve their processes.
mm,
And
mm.
it was only through a random connection that that opportunity came about. It looked interesting, uh, you know, right, I'll take it. I'll see what's what.
Yeah.
Did that for a while, and then again through another random connection, an opportunity came to work with a small consultancy that focused on food manufacturing in particular. So
Mm,
that took me in that space. And then after 5 years living on the road and realizing that, leaving at 4 a.m. on a Monday and getting home at 8 p.m. on a Friday isn't ideal. Then the wife and I decided we're actually going to move over to New Zealand. And so we
Wow.
took an opportunity again in New Zealand. My sister was living there, went over to New Zealand and said, I'm going to knock on some doors while I'm here. And one of the companies I knocked at, Fonterra, a big dairy company,
Mm.
biggest employer, certainly at the time. And I literally went in to the front desk and said, this is who I am. Would I be able to speak to anyone because I'm here in country? Can we
Mm.
arrange something? It was just before Christmas, and it was one of those wind down times. And someone from HR said, yeah, let's have a chat. And we sat down and had a coffee. And then a couple of months later, they contacted and said, yeah, we got a role for you if you're interested. And took that role, moved over to New Zealand. And it was being made redundant from that role that really got me thinking about what can I do next.
Mm. Mm.
And so I was looking at all the opportunities that were out there. I had some great coaching, which I always encourage people to do, particularly in those
Mm.
times of flux.
Mm.
And an opportunity was there to work with a bank in their business banking team, helping with, again, performance improvement role. And so I had no experience in banking. I'd spent a lot of money on credit cards. That's pretty much it.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I took a real risk and said, let's do this. And I took that role. And one of the things I often talk about is I deliberately took the sausage making experience into banking.
Right.
And I said, if
Tell
you
me more.
so what I found in that banking world was the way in which they were measuring and managing performance
Mm.
of their people
Mm.
um, was around how many dollars have you lent. It was very much the more dollars you lend, the better it is. Therefore, your bonuses are based on that, and that then generates behaviors that
Yes.
drive,
Yes.
drive the results within that business. Now, when it comes to business banking and small business, as it was in New Zealand, you've got business loans, you've got home loans, because a lot of people do home loans for second homes out there, credit cards, all sorts of different products that are there. But everything has been measured on dollars.
Mm.
And so a typical business loan might be $50,000. It's complex to do, it takes a long time. And so as a business banker, covertly or overtly, what I want to do to you as a customer is to say, now you don't want a business loan. What you want is a mortgage for $500,000.
Mm. Mm.
And we'll structure things so that it goes through the house, and all its behavior that the customer doesn't actually want that,
Mm.
but
Mm.
because you're bonused on how many dollars you can lend,
Mm. Mm.
it was driving those behaviors.
Yeah.
And one of the things from the manufacturing world and the sausage world is, if I've got sausage A, which might be a standard, high volume, easy to make product, I measure it against standard A.
Mm.
If I've
Mm.
got product B, which is a premium sausage that takes a lot more care, it's got different packaging, I manage it against standard B. So I might want 100 packs a minute on standard A and only 50 on product
Mm.
B.
Mm. Mm.
So I measure myself against those different standards.
Mm.
And I took that approach into the world of banking to say, how long should it take you from a productivity perspective
Mm.
to
Mm.
produce a business loan? So it might take you, let's say, 8 hours of working time. From a mortgage, it might be 2 hours. So there's no point in comparing the two on a dollar basis. You need to compare them on the effort that's there,
Mm. Mm. Mm.
plus layering on, is that what the customer needs?
Mm. I tell you
Yeah.
what, you must have been one of the only people in the history of the world to take lessons from the sausage making industry and put it into banking. But I think there's a powerful message there in terms of even even when you least expect it, there are some huge business lessons to be had from completely different sectors.
Yeah.
And it sounds like from across your story, one of the only things that's one of the main things that's sort of permeated through all of your experiences is this focus on performance improvement, right?
Yeah.
So you're into performance improvement, I'm into culture. The question is, how important do you think culture is for an organization's performance?
Beyond vital, I would say. It is what is needed for performance. If you haven't got the culture there, then you won't get sustainability of
Mm.
performance. And that's the reality. You can drive individual elements, you can put a project in place and you can get results. A lot, certainly in the early days, the consultancy work that I was doing in food manufacturing, it it was it's moved on a lot since, but it was what I would call size 10 consulting, which is you go
Mm,
in with your big boots and you tell people what to do and you kick them in the regions, and you say this is what you need to do, and it
mm,
gets change and it gets performance done.
mm,
What
mm,
it doesn't do is make sustainable change.
mm,
and
mm,
and that's where the culture comes in, is if you haven't built that culture for why it's important to change, why it's important to improve,
mm, mm.
then people will just fall back to their old ways of working, and that's the people element.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm biased, but I do agree. And a little bugbear of mine is when I see these big consultancies telling organizations that they're going to transform them and they're going to create sustainable shifts and all these things. And I'm incredibly skeptical, because I think only the organization itself can change that. And you,
Mm,
as an external consultant, I think can provide advice, feedback. You can coach them along the process, but only they can change their culture,
mm,
which is what's required for the actual sustainable behavior shift over time.
yeah.
So F1 is often heralded as a bit of a sort of high performance culture type industry. So it
Yeah.
would be good to understand from your perspective, what are the cultural traits that you think has got F1 its name as a high performance culture type sector?
Um, I think one of the things is the pace of change.
Mm,
I often talk about the sort of heartbeat of a business and how often, what is it you're making? What is the cadence of your industry? Because that
mm,
drives the desire to change at a certain pace. Like when
mm.
you're making sausages and you're getting orders on one day for that
Yeah,
day, you've got
yeah.
to react pretty quickly. So you've got to be fairly nimble, and it drives that permeates into the business. If you're doing aeroplane engine parts in those early days with 100-day turnaround time,
Mm,
it's a slow, treacly movement, and that permeates into the business. And I think there are things that leaders can do to influence that as well. But maybe that's a topic we can talk about at either now or a different time. But the world of F1, you have to perform. Performance is there. It's clear. It's on the
mm,
TV. It's in front of everybody on a week-to-week basis. And so the culture that it drives is passion for the industry, and
mm,
it drives a culture of whatever it takes to get that next level of performance through.
mm.
What
It's
are we going to do? Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. That one of the things I've heard there is people feel a passion for the industry and probably a sense of pride because their product is being seen and enjoyed on the TV each day.
Yeah.
And I do wonder the extent to which that might be true in retail, because I don't think I see it. People working in a retail environment, but I'm not sure there's the same pride there, as an example, and going, "Oh, these closed, I contributed in X way
Yeah.
to them." That maybe there is, but I wonder how organisations can draw that link, as it is so clear in the F1 world.
It's there's a couple of examples that I've seen in the past that have really hit home.
Mm,
In the dairy company in New Zealand, for instance, there's a they were making milk powders as one of their core things, and which would go into baby formula
mm,
and various other things. And what they would do is the people whose day-to-day job was just making powder and putting it into
mm,
a bag, and
mm,
uh, they'd remind them, put reminders around the place, but also do things like, let's get some people in and get some stories in place and talk about, what does this really mean? Your product is going to feed these people, and if we didn't have this, this is what it would mean to me.
mm,
And my
mm,
dad has been through various bits of issues with cancer and treatment and his recovery and all the rest of it, and been on trials. And one of the most powerful things he did off the back of that was he recorded a short message that was played back to the people who were doing the trials, which
mm,
is, this is who I am, this is the impact it's had on my life, and it's your trial and the results of that trial has allowed me to go off and go walking in the Maldives, no, sorry, in the uh, uh, somewhere in Europe with my wife and enjoy my life and be
mm,
out there.
mm, mm,
If I hadn't have had that,
mm.
then I would be in a very different place, and that means the world to me. Now,
mm,
when you're doing a trial and you've got numbers in front of you and maybe some, maybe some pharmaceuticals that you're playing with under, you don't connect what you're doing with the end customer.
mm,
And if you
mm,
can just share those stories and connect it with people, um, then it suddenly it's like, oh, this is why we're doing it.
mm,
This
mm.
is this is why it's important that we get this stuff right.
Yeah,
You know, why
yeah,
does quality matter? Because I'm going to be talked about a number on a day-to-day basis. Well, it can motivate people, but quality matters because your milk powder goes into these products and these are the babies. Look at the babies. Look
mm,
them in the eye and tell them that you're willing to do a bad job on quality tomorrow. It's
yeah.
like, that's the thing that connects people's hearts and minds.
Yeah, it's making the link between what people are doing every day and the end outcome much more visible and
Yeah.
salient. And I wonder the extent to which that's isn't happening actually in a lot of businesses today,
Mm.
because people are, for example, working on an Excel file, or they're sat at their desk working on a PowerPoint, and it's not immediately obvious to them, hold on a minute, why am I doing this? What is this contributing towards?
Mm.
And it sounds like that's something that in F1 and in those examples you provided, there's that clearer line of sight between what you're doing every day
Yeah.
and why you're doing it. So I've heard a few things then in terms of the F1 culture. So one is around the pace of change,
Yeah.
one's around clear, measurable outcomes and success, one's around having a clear line of sight between what you're doing every day and what it's contributing
Yeah.
towards. Um, what were the sorts of things that F1 organizations struggle with?
I think they struggle with, because I think they've got better over the years, and certainly since I joined, I think I've heard stories of me pre me joining, which was sort of 2015 sort of time,
Mm,
um,
mm,
and stories of of where it's gone to now and where it's moving to.
mm,
Historically, what they've really struggled with is almost the performance at any cost, and any human cost being within that. It's like you will stay up 20 hours in the day and you'll do this and then you'll do it again and then you'll do
mm,
it again and that will
mm,
become the
mm,
norm.
mm,
There's a difference between we've hit a specific problem and I really, I really need this team to come together, or I really need some individuals to just put in that extra bit of work because we've got this tight time frame,
mm,
and we will pay that back in some way, or we will make sure that we go back to the norm.
mm, mm,
Whereas historically, it's very much been that sort of macho. The
mm,
more longer hours I work, the better. Whatever I do, it's there, and I will ask as a leader. I will ask everything of my people, no matter what
mm,
impact it has.
mm,
I think it's moving a lot more towards the things now, which is actually what's the impact on you, and
mm,
partly
mm,
from from a human perspective and from a cultural, that's a nice place to work and you get
mm,
you get more engagement there. But don't forget, it's not all altruistic. That delivers more sustainable performance.
mm, mm.
If people burn out, you lose their performance and you have to invest in getting more experience and all the rest of it. So there is if you're a hard-minded business approach to this, then there is a business reason for driving that sort of culture of care and the
Mm.
culture of support for people, because you will get better performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the shift that you've described there is probably fairly reflective of what a lot of organizations have been going through themselves in the
Mm,
last 20, 30 years. We've seen this increasing shift towards a focus on inclusion and well-being and anti-burnout, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think sort of F1 is sort of, it sounds like moving in the same direction as lots of organizations. Um, I In terms of the the types of things that you think lots of organizations could take from the world of F1 in
mm.
terms of a high performance culture and in
Yeah.
terms of the good bits, what would you say they are?
Um, so one of the little sayings that I came across while there is talked about decisions at the point of most knowledge. So historically, again, you would probably have the most senior person in the business
Mm,
making the decisions in the moment. It's like there's a story of, I think it's Fernando Alonso's car. It's out on the track. Something's wrong. The race is about to start. You've got 3 minutes to fix the car, and you've
mm,
got an engineer literally underneath the car trying to fix it. Historically, you'd have leaders going, literally trying to go out and fix it themselves and
Wow.
telling people what to do. And you're like, this is how to solve that problem. I've got the
Mm,
experience.
mm, mm,
But what it moved towards was actually, I want the decisions to be made at the point of most knowledge. And
mm,
at the
mm,
moment, the person with the most knowledge as to what to do and how to fix it is under that car.
mm,
So as a leader, my role in driving that, if that's the culture that I want,
mm,
firstly, I've got to make sure that those people have the knowledge that they need. But I've also got to demonstrate to them and repeatedly demonstrate to them that I trust them to make a decision. I might challenge their decision. I might see what we can learn and could have done better, but I will allow them to make those decisions in the moment. Because if you don't, then as a leader, you're not leading, you are doing.
mm, mm,
And so those things I think are really important. And that's one that usually hits home a lot with people is actually, what am I doing? If am I leading here, or am I just
mm,
telling people what to do?
mm.
And there's a big difference.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people get into leadership positions because they like being in control,
Mm,
and they've been in control in many different situations, and because they've exercised their control, they've done well. But ironically, everything you're saying is actually about letting go of
mm,
control in the right moments and knowing that what you should be looking to control is, do you have the right people with the right knowledge, and are you trusting them and letting go and
mm.
coaching them? That is now your role. Your role is not to get underneath the car anymore.
Yeah.
But that, I imagine, feels really hard for
Mm.
leaders who perhaps, yeah, aren't used to doing that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there's actually another element of that story where the leader from McLaren at the time was standing in the pits with a sponsor partner.
Mm,
And that sponsor partner was saying, like, "What are you doing? Why aren't you out there? I'd be screaming. You seem
mm,
really calm."
mm, mm,
And it was that lesson of, look, this isn't my job.
mm,
My job is to make sure, up when these things happen, because they will. We know these
mm,
problems will
mm,
happen. We'll
mm,
do our
mm,
best to, I'll put in the processes in place to make sure we prevent them from happening wherever possible. But when they do happen, I want my people to know that they've got the power to make those decisions and do what's what.
mm,
So
mm,
my job is not now, because
mm,
it's too late. And actually, interesting, another element they said was, my job in that moment as a leader is to look for the eyes. If I've got a team of people who are going through a high pressure, highly important piece of change, where do the eyes naturally go to in in that team? And they might be looking to the most junior member. They might be looking at somebody who's in a completely different role to what's going on, but they're physically looking to somebody for support and guidance. And those are
mm,
the leaders
mm,
in your organization. And so
mm,
as a leader, one of your roles is to identify future leaders and identify the natural leaders,
mm,
because you
mm,
can, that's something in there already that you can enhance.
mm, mm.
And
That's
so, yeah, it's an interesting one.
I've never heard that. Look
Mm,
for the eyes. It makes me think about a professional golfer who is in a really high pressure, high performance situation,
right.
and he told a story about how he looked over at his coach, and a lot of people in that moment would look over at the coach and they would look like they're equally as stressed, and they are, make the putt, make the putt.
Mm,
And he looked over at the coach, and the coach just looked him back in the eyes and just smiled and just looked really calm. And all that did was just put him at ease and go,
right.
I'm here, I can do this, I'm all right.
Yeah.
And just that subtle look of comfort
Yeah.
actually sort of really helped him. So anyway, that's what the look for the eyes
Mm,
uh, little idiom brought up for me.
nice.
So um, you mentioned this decisions at the point of most knowledge point
Yeah.
in terms of something that you think a lot of organizations can learn from F1. So,
Yeah.
how well do you think organizations are doing that at the current time?
Um, Not very in general. From the organizations that I see,
Mm,
there's still that element of control that people want. And it's it's probably most relevant in middle management. Is that's a difficult transition to make from, being a very good doer to being a manager and a leader. And so being able to let go and to be able to realize what your role is and what your role isn't is a key piece in that moment. But yeah, I think that those elements of just being clear, and I think that that's one of the elements that I really like, is those sayings, things like "look for the eyes" or "decisions at the point of most knowledge." Culture is driven a lot by language, and it's the repeated language that you use that often drives that culture, and and idioms play a really important part in that as well. So if there's a lot in the armed forces, Navy SEALs, all those sorts of guys. That it's like, what's the little phrase that's going to mean something to you and your team, and maybe your team only, won't mean anything to anybody else unless you explain it behind it. But for you in that moment, it's like, we're looking for the eyes here. And then that's that little challenge, that's that nod, and the moment of yeah, you're right, this is, we've agreed what we were going to do, this isn't my role, you're right, let me step back. And that ability to ground yourself and step back.
It's almost like a code phrase. I also wonder, so you're talking about how language can be really powerful in shaping culture, and I totally agree. And I would also add and say sometimes that the language can be indicative of the challenges that an organization is facing, and sometimes it can be really subtle, I think. So if you one of the things that's often said is, oh, that's my side of desk role, that's what I'm doing side of desk.
Right.
And what message does that send about how there's an expectation that you have a side of desk job on top of your job? Therefore, what does that say about the culture? Equally, if people are or aren't saying they're stressed, if stress has become a dirty word in your culture,
Yeah.
what might that actually mean? It might tell you that your organization isn't actually as open as you say you are to people when they're being vulnerable and asking for help. So I totally agree that language and the language around culture can be really powerful for better or for worse, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm really curious to hear about a little bit more about some more of the things that you've taken from F1 and successfully implemented in an organizational setting, because I think a lot of people listening in might be saying, well, F1's great, but it's completely different in a big business where you're selling something completely different. So
Yeah.
it would be great to hear some sort of real case examples of some F1 stories or tools that have really landed well.
Yeah, and I'll often preface, not sure what the word is, the word this here, in that I wouldn't call myself an F1 fan. And one of the things we often come across is, you're talking about F1, that's completely different. But what I've been a fan of, and what interested me in the first place, was the high performance element of what they do. So you don't have to be a fan of the sport in order to take the learnings. And it's the same, you can take learnings from anywhere as long as you identify, this is what it's going to be beneficial to me and my team and my organization. So therefore, I'm not necessarily interested in being, at the race itself, watching your favorite driver go around. But what I want to do is understand, how do you do this stuff? What can I learn, and how can I adapt it and adopt it?
Yes.
So there's two key things that come to mind, really. One is there's a counterintuitive element to how a data-driven organization like McLaren, because it is highly data-driven, approaches data. And this is something that I take to a lot of clients at the moment is, if you want to be data-driven, put data last. Now,
okay, tell me more.
What I see in a lot of organizations is, you've got the IT team or somebody going, right, here's a new system that's going to give us all this new data. I've seen it in factories where they've spent millions on new equipment that gives you, with servo motors that tell you if they're up or down or wearing at a certain point. Or I've seen it in service industries where they're spending all this money on creating more and more data, on the assumption that that's going to lead to performance. And all too often, what it leads to is people drowning in data and struggling with what to do. And so one of the counterintuitive lessons that I took from my time at McLaren was, start with the results that you're trying to drive. What are we trying to do here? What's the performance that we want? And it's not just a case of we want to win, we want to be profitable. You've
mm,
also got to
mm,
consider the elements of those results as well. So
mm,
what's the
mm,
strategic guidelines that we want here?
mm,
We've got a strong focus on sustainability. So we've got to have results and sustainability. We've got
mm,
to have results and fan engagement. So it's not just a case of winning the race. That gets you the immediate result, but it's the fan engagement, it's the sustainability element that's going to make you have longevity in that
mm,
sport.
mm,
And so
mm,
once you've clarified what that means to your organization, you've then got, what are the actions, what are the things that you can do about that, what are the
mm,
levers at your disposal. And that can be as simple as, the policies that you have in place, the way in which the processes that you have, the way in which you measure and manage people's performance, all of
mm,
these things that you can do as a business that impact the results that you're trying to drive. But it's
mm,
got to be related. You've got to understand the results first and relate it
mm,
back.
mm,
The next level is about people. So who are the people involved in those actions, making the decisions, implementing those decisions? And there's a whole raft of things around the people thing that you can look at, um, setting up teams, being effective teams, or some wonderful stuff there.
mm,
But it's the next level down that starts to get really interesting, which is insights. What are the insights that my people need to make the best decisions on the actions that drive the results? And insights are bits of data and information pulled together in a certain way and
mm,
presented so that they support the decision. They don't make the decision because that is automation, but it's that, here's three options and the pros and cons of those options in this
mm,
situation.
mm,
And that's an insight. Um,
mm,
and then the final level is data. So what's the smallest data set to drive those insights? And that
mm,
comes about from, if you want more data on a car, that comes with additional weight for sensors and telemetry and things.
mm,
Therefore, it has a negative impact on performance.
mm, mm.
So you've got to think about things in a different way. And that
Yeah.
rapid performance, as I call it, is there.
So it sounds like, to use a really pragmatic example, if somebody is creating, let's say, a report of all the
Mm,
data available to them on something,
yeah,
actually the data comes last. The data is in the references or the appendices, and actually the report is becomes a, we're trying to achieve this, we need to give these people this data to help them to make X decisions. Here's the insight that the data is telling us, the big things that you need to take from this data, and then the
yeah,
data comes last, so people don't get overwhelmed with all the data and the things that they could take from it. Is that a fair summary?
definitely. And one of the things that, the approach you can take, if you want to take a simple model, because I'm a simple man myself, you've got what, so what, and now what. And
Right.
those for me line up with data, information, and insights. So the data is the what. It's we had 27 sales last month.
Mm, mm,
Well, okay, so what? Well,
mm,
the plan was for 50 sales last month.
mm,
So we're under target.
mm,
Okay, so I've got some context. Well, now
mm,
what?
mm,
And we've identified that the reason for that was that our marketing material wasn't hitting home in that space. So
mm,
now we recommend that we address that marketing messaging in that particular channel. Right. I've got something that, or we could spend some more on training, or
mm,
we could do
mm,
this.
mm,
But this is where the insight says, if you do this, it's likely to have the impact that you want.
mm,
Um,
mm.
and there could that can be options. It's not just the one thing. It can be options in front of people as well.
I've not heard that before. What, so what,
Mm,
and now what? I really like
mm.
that. And if that could replace the 83-page reports that I'm sometimes sent,
Yeah,
and made to read, that would be amazing, because I think I could take meaning much more quickly and easily from that. And that'll then
definitely.
help me and others obviously to make better decisions. So so out of all of these things that you're sharing with me in terms of the lessons you've taken from F1 and perhaps what you could take into an organizational setting, what would you describe as the perhaps the one big myth or the biggest mistakes that many organizations make around culture?
Um, I think there's probably a myth particularly at a middle management level, maybe at a high level as well, that the culture is what it is,
Mm,
and that we can't influence it. And if it, if it's not where we want it to be, then we can, tweak it a little bit. But that's the culture in this organization. That's the way we do things. That's always the case.
mm,
But
mm.
actually, that for me is a myth that can be debunked relatively easily, which is just go out and try something new and see what's what and learn from it
Mm,
and
mm,
experiment. So
I totally agree. I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is this term epic. Every person impacts culture.
right.
And another thing is when you're in a social situation, you are you're listening to people and you're looking at what's done, and
Mm,
each of those things sends a signal about what's valued, what isn't valued. And so in that regard, everything you say and everything you do will send a signal to other people around what the culture is and what's valued.
yeah.
So I totally agree that if enough people start taking responsibility and say, I impact culture, I have a role to play, and in what they're saying and doing, they're trying to be purposeful around sending the right signals around what we stand for and what it's about to work here.
Mm,
Um, Eventually things will start to change.
mm,
And I agree with you insofar as often it's that the middle management who have some power and some responsibility, but I often hear, well, this is senior leaders' problem. It's
mm.
their fault, as opposed to taking responsibility. So I totally agree. And what about a culture hack that you love? So something that, takes a little effort, or but something that can also have a big impact at the same time.
Um, there's a couple that come to mind really. I think the one that I'll bring is how, as a leader, you celebrate success. And if you can go about understanding that, not the results that you're trying to drive necessarily, but how you want them driven.
Mm,
So if I go back about that sustainability or that fan engagement, as a leader, I'm going to be very vocal and very uh, celebratory
mm,
about where, even if it hasn't driven the results yet. If I
mm,
see somebody doing some great fan engagement, I'm
mm,
making it loud and proud that that's the thing. That's brilliant to see. Have you seen this, everybody? This is the sort of
mm,
fan engagement we want to bring in. This is the sort of sustainability piece that we want.
mm,
And
mm,
people will recognize that people are being rewarded and
mm.
recognized in themselves for doing those things, and not just for the result. The results will
Yes,
come.
yes, yes.
But yeah, if you want to drive that cultural element, you've got to celebrate how things are being done as well
Mm.
as what's being done as well.
I love that, and it's something I saw last night actually. So I play a very amateur level of cricket, something I don't. There isn't a high performance culture in it at all. Um, but if someone played a good shot or the shot had a good outcome,
Yeah.
people would say, "Great shot." I had a challenge with it because I said, well, you're not going to keep getting away with that because how you're playing the shot will get you out.
Yeah.
So if we focus instead on what you're doing, regardless of the
Mm,
results will then follow if you continue to show the right technique, do the right thing. And I think that's something I hear a lot of in elite sport. They differentiate between personal performance and results,
mm,
and the focus is on personal performance with the recognition that results are somewhat out of your control.
yeah.
And if you focus on performance, the right results will come. So I really like that. If you're a manager, if you're a leader, praise people for how they're doing things, their
Yeah.
performance, not just the outcomes. Because if you're promoting the right behaviors, the right results will come. So
Very
I
much
love
so.
that.
Mm.
Sounds good. Thank you. Um, just as I'm conscious of, we could talk about this all day. I'm
I'm
conscious
sure
of
we
your
could.
time and the listeners' time. I'm just curious, do you have any final reflections on our conversation or anything else that you'd like to add?
Um, no, I think there's a wonderful element of, recognizing that whatever position you are in the organization,
Mm,
you can drive culture. You can do something that impacts that culture. And if you're a leader who wants to deliberately make a difference and deliberately point the culture in one direction or another, then there are things that you can do about it. And I think that's a wonderful piece about what you do and how you do it, really, is supporting that every person impacts culture. There you go. It's that element of you all play a role in that cultural element.
Absolutely. And it's about taking responsibility for that as well, and not saying, oh, it's
Yeah.
HR's responsibility,
Yes,
or it's
exactly.
the senior leader's responsibility. Awesome. Well, thank you so much to you, Paul, for sharing your time and your experiences. I really appreciate your time today. So I think that's probably all we've got time for. So if you did like this episode, please do listen to our other episodes for more first-hand experiences and lessons on all things culture. Alternatively, please do contact me at matt@clickculture.co.uk. Otherwise, that's all for today. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks again, Paul, and go well, everybody.